The events in this story happened to me in 2014, when I was living and working in rural Japan. But they still keep me awake at night. There are sights, sounds, and feelings that take me right back. A nocturnal animal scurrying just out of sight, faint laughter with no clear source, a sudden strange smell that comes out of nowhere in the dark. These things remind me that all this light and civilization is as thin as a corpse's skin. And if you peel it back, who knows what nightmarish things you might find gnawing underneath. When I made that mistake, I was teaching English in a town with fewer than 3,000 inhabitants, nestled in the mountains of a humid river valley. It could be lonely at times, but it was also a wonderful experience. Riding my bicycle through the field at twilight, following cobweb trails to abandoned shrines, and sharing rice wine with my wise and friendly neighbors. My biggest problem came from within. I never fully adjusted to the new time zone, and insomnia plagued me for the duration of my stay. I just couldn't find a good sleep schedule. Arriving home after my final class, I dozed on the sun-warmed tatami mats until the long, cold shadow of twilight crept into the room. I'd usually nod off again just before dawn, then wake up and do it all over again. I kept one routine, my nightly trip to the 24-hour convenient gas station along the main highway. I'd hop on my bike around midnight and paddle out into a dark, surreal world of croaking frogs and black river water, glittering in the yellowish street lamp light. Sometimes it felt like the scrawny teenage shop attendant and I were the last people awake in the world. I'd buy some snacks, flip through the magazines, and make a little small talk before riding off home. Until I experienced something that changed my routine forever. That night, my afternoon nap had stretched until about 2 in the morning, and I awoke ravenously hungry. As I rummaged through my rented home in search of food, I had an awful feeling that I missed something important and irreplaceable, and nothing would ever be the same again. The cool night air and the familiar light of the conveni relaxed me as I rode into the empty parking lot. As I approached the door, I noticed there was no attendant inside. Behind the conveni, a car door slammed. I crept around the side of the building, not sure why I felt the need to be stealthy. Around back, 4 men stood between a dumpster and a black Mercedes. One was a conveni attendant with a single gold earring and spike hair who I didn't recognize. I figured he was on the late shift. He wore rubber gloves and was messing with something in the car trunk. 2 of the other men had on dark suits and sunglasses even though it was night, and were whispering angrily at a third, who looked hastily dressed in an untucked gray shirt and loose necktie. Even with my low level of Japanese, I could tell they were berating him about damage to some merchandise. The attendant heaved the first trash bag out of the car trunk, revealing what was inside. A plastic tarp soaked in blood. A girl's corpse, chopped apart messily. I clutched my mouth to hold back vomit or a scream, or both. Fear froze me in place as I watched the attendant drop bag after bag of what used to be a person like me into the conveni dumpster. When it was all over, the attendant threw away his gloves and accepted an envelope from one of the dark-suited men who shoved the disheveled buyer into the car. As their headlights sprang to life, I pressed myself up against the cold brick wall, praying that the beams would miss me. I shut my eyes as the black Mercedes rumbled by, seemingly oblivious to my presence. The attendant locked the back door as he returned to his post, and I was left panting in the darkness. Had I made it, I thought I was alone at last, when a pair of eyes like golden lamps sprang open on the forested hill across from me, and some night animal, a fox maybe, made a loud exit to the undergrowth. I must have gasped, because I heard the conveni attendant grunt angrily and grab something, his footsteps rushing for the front door. I kicked over a box of recycled bottle for added chaos, then bolted for my bike. As I paddled for my life, I risked one backward glance. The beefy attendant was standing silhouetted by the convening lights, a huge meat cleaver in his hand. The right thing would have been to call the police immediately. If I had, I may have been spared the strange events that followed, or I, too, might have disappeared into several black bags. It's difficult to know how far the consequences of action or inaction can lead. I needed time to process what I'd seen, to drink water, to plan what to say. By the time I finished, dawn had turned the rice field a misty shade of blue. I called the principal of my school and asked if she could request a police officer meet me before school started. She was worried. She agreed. The officer was waiting for me when I arrived, without his rumpled gray shirt, loose necktie, and hacked-apart corpse nearby. I almost didn't recognize him. My words choked in my throat as he smiled and bowed. The officer, or killer, addressed me in the most polite way possible, but I knew he'd seen my initial reaction. The story I stammered about foxes getting in my trash was as fake as a smile, and he knew it. His gaze coolly probed for weakness, and the more he questioned me, the more I was sure that somehow he knew. When our muddled, awkward conversation finally ended, he gave me another smile and promised to keep an eye on me. Listening to the footsteps of his polished black shoes echoing ominously down the school corridor, it sounded more like a threat than a promise. I rushed back to the dumpster as soon as I could, but it was too late. The body was gone. They would get away with it. There would never be justice for that poor girl, and more would probably follow in her path. Why hadn't I checked the license plate number of the black Mercedes or called the police immediately? Bitter thought formed an ugly gray veil between me and the rest of the world, and it took me a long time to notice the golden eyes observing me from the other side of the riverbank as I trudged gloomily home. It was twilight when I arrived, but not so dark that I didn't see the figure waiting in the shadows of my porch. The last ray of light caught the shiny buttons on his police uniform. I stopped, turned on my heel, and headed back the way I came. I didn't think about how exposed I'd be down by the riverbank. I didn't think about the lack of light down there, or tall grass that could hide a body. I didn't think about how if you wanted to make sure someone never talked, that was the perfect place to do it. Like a hunted fox, I panicked and fled. I couldn't see my pursuer in the deepening darkness, but I could hear their footsteps. I was walking fast rather than running, captive to the childish belief that if I didn't run, the person chasing me wouldn't either. Yet the further I walked along the riverbank pathway that led away from town and back toward the highway, the closer those footsteps seemed to get. The darkness under the bridge ahead was as black as an open grave, and I never felt more trapped or alone. The wind in the wayside grass seemed to be whispering that I was going to die here, and that my family and friends would never know what happened. The footsteps were so close. Instead of turning around, I screamed and ran like mad under the bridge. My pursuer gave chase. Halfway through the inky blackness beneath the bridge, something happened that I still can't explain. I saw myself on the other side of the river, just beyond the dark underpass. This version of me looked as if I had run through the river, which wasn't deeper than knee-height at any point, and seemed to glow faintly. This vision was so shocking that I stopped running, but the footsteps behind me didn't. They sloshed into the river, where they seemed to struggle, thrash, then stop. A horrible smell filled my nostrils, a mix of dirty, wet hair, seaweed, and rotting fish. I slowly backed away towards the light, as the ominous smell was followed by an even more frightening sound. Something was gnawing on bone. Beyond the bridge underpass, I panted and waited. It wasn't long before I saw bright gold buttons on the tattered remains of a police uniform floating away down the river. For several weeks, the whole town was abuzz with gossips about the missing police officer. Something told me it wouldn't be long before the man in the black Mercedes came by to figure out exactly where he'd gone. The circumstances around me were strange and frightening, but I felt like I actually had a chance to bring the killers to justice. There was something more as well. I'd seen or heard the golden-eyed animal at least once a day since the incident at the bridge. It was like it was following me, willing me to do something. I'd long since stopped thinking of it as an ordinary animal, and the last thing I wanted to do was make it angry. That was why, despite the panic that rose in my chest every time I saw it, I began staking out the combini at night. The routine was fairly normal. The buff, spiky-haired attendant would show up nightly and appear to carry out a normal, boring night shift. Until I looked more closely. Sometimes the customer would buy a random item with a large amount of cash and receive a little packet under the counter instead of change. Girls in party clothes would spend far too much time in the combini restroom and leave wobbling on their heels. Nervous single men would enter, pay, and receive a key, probably to a room at a local love hotel. The attendant looked more on edge than the last time I'd seen him calmly hacking up a corpse, but otherwise, it looked like the racket was thriving. One night, I thought I had a perfect opportunity. The attendant ate a spicy tuna roll. From the looks on his face and my own prior experience, I knew he was about to spend a long time in the restroom. Enough time to dash in, grab the bell and keep it from ringing, and snag whatever evidence the guy had stashed in his bottom drawer by the cash register. I was about to sleep behind the desk when the bathroom door stepped open, and the attendant stepped out. He'd just been washing his hands. I froze for a few moments. We stared each other down.
"You're cute,"
he grunted in casual Japanese.
"For a foreigner."
He didn't recognize me, but I didn't feel any safer. He was coming toward me fast, and the smell of stale sweat and body spray was soon way too close for comfort. I was backed against the counter with nowhere to go. Flirting badly and aggressively, he told me he knew some guys who could get me the job of my dreams. As his heavy, gold-ringed hand closed over mine, I wondered how many people he killed with it. Someone giggled outside, and the attendant spun away from me. There was a girl in the parking lot, just beyond the glow of the nearest street light. Even from this distance, she had a kind of radiant beauty that caught my breath and made it hard to look away.
"That's my friend,"
I lied quickly.
"Gotta go."
I squirmed away towards the door, but I should have known I wouldn't be getting away that easily. The attendant followed.
"Your friend, huh?"
He hissed threateningly in my ear.
"You better introduce me."
He didn't wait for an answer, just shouldered past me and towards the girl. When he was almost close enough to touch her, she changed. I don't know how else to describe it, but it was like her features melted away, leaving blank skin where there should have been a face. One of her hands extended and reached towards the attendant's chin like a multi-jointed spider's claw. He screamed and took off running for the bend in the mountain road up ahead, the monster fast on his heels. The attendant was in the middle of the road when the headlights of a black Mercedes whipped around the curve, way over the speed limit and much too fast to stop. For a brief moment, they illuminated a pair of glowing golden eyes where the monster had been. Tires squealed and swerved as the car slammed into the mountain cliff. The medical team later said that the attendant in the road was killed on impact. The two mid-ranking Yakuza in the vehicle were not wearing seatbelts and were flung from the vehicle. The gashes that severed their throats were unusual, but not inconsistent with injuries from similar accidents. Their deaths expose a ring of drug dealers and human traffickers who use the 24-hour convenience locations as drop-off points for their illicit business. I left Japan not long after, and I never saw the golden eyed animal again. More than just the traumatic events I'd seen, I feared what that entity might expect me to do next. It had saved my life, however, more than once, and I wanted to pay it back somehow. That is why, before I left, I paid the new convenience attendant a hefty sum to always leave the leftover food uncovered out back along the mountainside. When I spoke to him again, he told me it always disappears by morning.